Thank you all for coming, ministers, senior government officials, and particularly all of you, members of the media, and ladies and gentlemen, and fellow South Africans. When we delivered the State of the Nation address, we announced a range of measures that we would initiate to set our country on a new path of growth, employment, and transformation. Since then, we have taken decisive steps in a number of areas to rebuild investor confidence, to end corruption, and also through the state capture process to end that, and to restore good governance at state-owned enterprises and strengthen critical public institutions in our country. Yet, as much as we have done this, it is evident from the contraction of the economy that indicated in the first two quarters that our economic challenges are huge and our difficulties are severe, and in the end will take extraordinary effort, and they will also take some time to overcome. This is the reality that we are having to deal with. For several years now, our economy has not grown at the pace that is needed to create enough jobs and to lift our people out of poverty. Public finances have been constrained, limiting the ability of government to expand its investment in economic and social development. In recent months, the structural weaknesses in our economy have been made worse by global factors such as a rising oil price, weakening sentiment towards emerging markets such as ours, and the deteriorating trade relations between the US and other major economies in the world. Now, all this has had a bearing on us. This has negatively, in the end, affected South Africans in more than one way. It is in response to these factors and these conditions, many of which are outside our control and we have very little that we can do about them, that we are announcing today, following its adoption by Cabinet, an economic stimulus and recovery plan. The stimulus and recovery plan we are outlining consists of a range of measures, and some of them are financial, some of them are non-financial, that will be implemented immediately to firstly ignite economic activity in our country, and secondly, to restore investor confidence, thirdly, to prevent further job losses, and of course, to create new jobs, and fourthly, to address some urgent challenges that affect the conditions that are faced by a number of vulnerable groups in our country. The fifth measure has to do with the municipal area, where we are embarking on a number of interventions as well. So 5 measures that we will be embarking on. The measures we are announcing give priority to those areas of economic activity that will have the greatest impact on youth, women, as well as small businesses. The stimulus and recovery plan has a number of broad areas. Firstly, the implementation of growth-enhancing economic reforms. And secondly, reprioritization of public spending to support job creation. In other words, we are reprioritizing our current budget to focus on the very urgent issues that can have an impact on our current economic situation. Thirdly, we'll be establishing an infrastructure fund, what we call a South Africa Infrastructure Fund, We'll give details about that in a little while. Fourthly, we'll be addressing urgent and pressing matters in education and in health. And the fifth one will be investing in municipal social infrastructure improvement. In the various municipal areas in our country, there are dire needs that need to be addressed with immediate effect. Now, fellow South Africans, it is generally agreed that in order for our economy to grow at a rate that will lead to job creation, on a meaningful scale, we need to significantly increase the level of investment. That is generally known. We are decisively and rapidly accelerating the implementation of key economic reforms that will unlock greater investment in important growth sectors in our economy. These reforms include immediate changes that were approved by Cabinet to South Africa's visa architecture or regime. Within the next few months, amendments will be made to the regulations on the travel of minors. The list of countries requiring visas to enter South Africa will also be reviewed, and an e-visa pilot will be implemented, and the visa requirements for highly skilled foreigners will also be revised. These measures have a huge potential to boost tourism and to make business travel into our country a lot more conducive for those who want to come to South Africa to conduct business and look after their own investments. Tourism continues to be a great job creator. Through these measures, we are confident that many more tourists will visit South Africa, and South Africa opens its arms to welcome the millions of tourists who will be streaming our way following this architectural reconstruction. It is imperative that South Africa restores investment and exploration levels in the mining sector, as mining and mineral beneficiation activities have significant potential to drive long-term growth, to enhance exports, and also to increase job creation. Following extensive consultation that involved industry players, that involved communities, that involved labor and the government in its various structures, Cabinet approved the revised mining charter. This will revitalize the mining industry and provide certainty to investors while charting a sustainable path towards a transformed and inclusive mining industry that will lead to the growth of our economy. Parliament will also be requested in terms of its rules not to proceed with the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act, the MPRDA, which has contributed to a lot of uncertainty in the sector. Separate legislation for the regulation of the oil and gas industry will be drafted through the government's legislative process, and good proposals will be brought forward once again. Now, to reduce the cost of doing business and to boost exports and to make South Africa industry more competitive, government has begun a review of various administrative prices, starting with electricity, ports, and rail tariffs. These have been raised as matters of great concern by a number of players. We are now beginning the process of looking at all these. Within the next few weeks, government will initiate the process for the allocation of high-demand radio spectrum to enable licensing. This will unlock significant value in the telecommunications sector. It will also increase competition, promote investment, and reduce data costs. Lower data costs will also provide relief for poor households, for students, and increase the overall competitiveness of the South African economy. Other measures that we will implement include expanding procurement from small businesses and cooperative, as well as using trade measures. Obviously, these will be done within the WTO rules to protect poultry and other sensitive sectors. And we will also have a vigorous crackdown on illegal imports that keep streaming into our country. The central element of the economic stimulus and recovery plan is the reprioritization of spending towards activities that have the greatest impact on economic growth, domestic demand and job creation, with a particular emphasis on township and rural economies, but also affecting women and the youth as well. Our government has limited fiscal space to increase spending or borrowing, and it is imperative that we make sure that the resources that we do have are used to the greatest effect. One of the biggest challenges we have is that we do not have fiscal space to be able to continue pouring a lot of money into the economy, but also to go and borrow in a big way. So we have had to resort to reprioritizing our budget, our spending, and we are outlining here, as part of this stimulus and recovery plan, what we will be able to do within the current fiscal framework and in line with the normal budgetary processes. Now, reprioritized funding will be directed towards investments in agriculture and economic activity in townships and rural areas. Agriculture has massive potential for job creation in the immediate as well as in the long term. This has been proven over and over again, and the NDP said that we could create 1 million jobs by 2030 just in agriculture alone. So we're focusing our attention on agriculture. The interventions we have identified will include a package of support measures for black commercial farmers so as to increase their entry into food value chains through access to infrastructure like abattoirs and feedlots. Blended finance will be mobilized from the Land Bank, from the Industrial Development Corporation, and commercial banks as well, to give full effect to this. The Land Bank is currently conducting and concluding transactions that will create employment opportunities in the agricultural sector over the next 3 to 5 years. A significant portion of the funding will go towards export-oriented crops that are highly labor-intensive. Government will finalize the signing of 30-year leases to enable farmers to mobilize funding for agricultural development. As part of the work to develop agriculture and ensure effective reform, I have appointed an advisory panel on land reform that will guide the interministerial committee work that is being done on land reform, that is chaired by the Deputy President David Mabuza. The 10-person panel is a top-class panel of people who have good experience in agriculture, who are business-oriented, and who are real farmers, some of them, and academics and lawyers. They will advise government on the implementation of a fair and equitable land reform process that redresses the injustices of the past, increases agricultural output, that also promote economic growth and protect food security. Their names and further details, as well as their mandate, will be made available in a separate statement. In the second instance, reprioritized funding will also be redirected towards igniting economic activity in townships and rural areas. We have prioritized the revitalization of 3 regional and 26 township industrial parks that will act as catalysts for broader economic and industrial development in townships and rural areas. Many of these have been lying fallow for many, many years, and we now want to get on with the task of revitalizing them. A township and rural entrepreneurship fund is being established to provide finance to either scale up existing projects or provide startup capital for new projects. And this will be embarked upon based on the experience that we have garnered in earlier initiatives, and also looking for new and very innovative methods of revitalizing township economies. In the third instance, we will also be redirecting resources towards addressing immediate challenges in health and also in education, which are critical to the health, well-being, and productivity of our people as a whole. The health sector has been subjected to enormous challenges throughout the country, and some of those have had to do with shortages of various instruments that they need, their beds and what have you. Arising from the priorities that have been identified at the meeting of the President's Coordinating Council earlier this week, additional funding will be directed to addressing the dire state of sanitation facilities in many public schools, ensuring the completion of 1,100 sanitation projects in the current fiscal year. To address some of the shortages, and just to deal with sanitation, we have received enormous support from the private sector, who, after the deaths of young people in these latrines, they have come forward, and we are now receiving daily support, even from individuals, but people who want to assist and fund the challenge that we face in relation to sanitation in our schools. This project will be continued with, and to address the shortages in our hospitals, funding is being made available immediately to buy beds and linen, while the Minister of Health will immediately fill 2,200 critical medical posts, including nurses as well as interns. And this is an urgent need that we are addressing through this whole intervention. In total, the plan will result in reprioritized expenditure and new project level funding of around 50 billion rand. The Minister of Finance will provide more details about the final amounts involved in the specific areas affected during the medium-term budget policy statement next month. The stimulus and recovery plan prioritizes also infrastructure spending as a critical driver of economic activity. Infrastructure expansion and maintenance has the potential to create many, many jobs on a very large scale. But it also has the potential of being able to attract investment and to lay a foundation for sustainable economic expansion. Now, our infrastructure spend has over the years been tapering down. And the tapering down of infrastructure means less and less economic activity. And it is for this reason that we're now focusing in a very bold way on infrastructure, with a view to unlocking the potential to create new jobs on a large scale, we have dedicated, or decided rather, to set up what we call a South Africa Infrastructure Fund, which will fundamentally transform our approach to the rollout, the building and implementation of infrastructure projects. The lessons that we learned in the 2010 World Cup infrastructure build and rollout will stand us in good stead as we set out to establish this fund and to address the implementation of our infrastructure challenge. The South Africa Infrastructure Fund will reduce the current fragmentation of infrastructure spend and ensure more efficient and effective use of resources. Our infrastructure play is scattered throughout the country, and at times we tend to work in silos. Now, through this structure that we are creating, we will be able to create economies of scale, have a mega fund that will be able to galvanize even the private sector to participate in this. The private sector has been invited to enter into meaningful partnerships with us, and we have spoken to a number of them in banks and in pension funds, insurance companies. They are hugely excited about this. The contribution from the fiscus towards the infrastructure fund over the medium-term expenditure framework period would be in excess of 400 billion rand, which we will use to leverage additional resources from developmental finance institutions, multilateral development banks, and private lenders, as well as the private sector and ordinary investors. We will utilize this to have a blended finance type of character, and we will get really smart and outstanding people to come and help us run this fund. To ensure that these funds are used effectively and that the projects are completed on time and on budget, we are establishing a dedicated infrastructure executive team in the presidency that has extensive project management and engineering expertise to assist with the project design and oversee implementation. The team will definitely identify and quantify shovel-ready public sector projects such as roads and dams, and engage the private sector to manage delivery. The role of the PICC, the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Council, will be strengthened to ensure improved coordination across the three spheres. As part of the reprioritization of spending, additional infrastructure funding will be directed towards provincial and national roads, human settlements, water infrastructure, schools, student accommodation, and public transport. In support of the stimulus efforts, the IDC will be targeting to increase its approvals to 20 billion over 12 months, an increase of some 20% on the previous year. This funding will target the productive sectors of the economy, including manufacturing, mining, industrial infrastructure, and sectors that are currently under distress. We also need short-term municipal investments to address the challenges that our people face. Now, we often see many protests around the country with service delivery challenges and the shortage of funding for a number of those. We have identified 57 priority pilot municipalities in order to unlock infrastructure spending in the short term. And these 57 municipalities span across the 9 provinces of our country, and details will be outlined by the Minister of COGTA. This spending will cover, amongst other things, sewage, purification and reticulation, which has been a huge challenge in a number of municipalities, refuse sites, electricity reticulation, and water reservoirs. Cutting across all these measures are a series of interventions to ensure that growth is labor intensive and that young people in particular are drawn into the labor market in large numbers. Some of these measures include the extension of the employment tax for incentive for a further 10 years, with a view to ensuring that it works more effectively and reaches out to many more young people. Greater support will also be given for public employment programs. Additional support will also be given to clothing and textile sector and the use of funds from the Unemployment Insurance Fund to support labor activation programs. Igniting economic activity does require partnership and collaboration. It cannot be done by one partner or one social partner alone or by government only. It must be a national effort in which all of us as partners in South Africa work together to restore our economy to growth in the immediate term and prepare the ground for sustainable, inclusive growth into the future. We have held consultations with leaders from business and labor on this plan. We are encouraged by the support they have pledged for the measures outlined, and many have undertaken to provide resources and expertise to ensure that we succeed in what we are doing. We continue to draw on the guidance and the support of bodies such as the National Planning Commission, which will soon release its own guidance on focal areas to stimulate the economy, and government will continue to coordinate its work with formations like the CEO initiatives that is composed of the CEOs of businesses, including labor leaders. We are certain that the measures we are outlining here will have an impact and will complement the deliberations also that we are going to have at the Job Summit. The preparation for the Job Summit is underway, and the social partners are looking at a number of proposals on how we can create further jobs in our economy. We are certain that these interventions will help to put the economy on a far firmer footing as current investors and potential investors will convene in Johannesburg for the investment conference at the end of October. And as South Africans, we have confronted challenges that are far greater than the challenge that we are confronting today. And by working together, we managed to end a seemingly intractable conflict and set out to reform and transform our country and to put it on a path of peaceful transition to the democracy that we enjoy today. Now, we have it within us to come together once more and forge a new path of growth, a new path of jobs, and also a new trajectory of transformation. We are confident that the elements of the economic stimulus and recovery plan that we have outlined will play a decisive role in reversing the recent contraction of the South African economy. We are having to deal with what we have in hand. And with the constraints that our economy has, we've had to come up with ideas that can inject more life into our economy. And we believe that if we all pull together, we will be able to move our country in the direction of creating more jobs. Together, we are taking bold and concrete measures to ensure a clear and sustained improvement in the life of all South Africans. As any government will know, the government has to come up with an initiative. It has to come up with plans to lead, but as it does so, it moves along with a number of other social partners. And in this regard, we are glad that we have social partners that we work with in this country, in this economy, who will be able, together with us, move this economy forward. I thank you.